again for this little delay. I welcome to the floor Madam Maria Jodłowiec on translation metaphors in Kuang's Bebel, or the necessity of violence, a relevance theoretic analysis.
Thank you very much. The main aim of my paper is to show how relevance theoretic treatment of metaphor provides a nuanced framework for understanding the metaphors portrayed in the book by Rebecca Kuang, Bebel, or the necessity of violence, those metaphors that are related directly to translation, sorry. By analyzing specific metaphors in the novel, I'm going to explore the empowering and exploitative nature of translation as depicted by the author. But first, a few words about the author. Rebecca Kuang is a Chinese-American novelist, translator, and academic. She will be turning 29 years old next week, in fact. She and her family immigrated to the United States when Rebecca was 4, and she grew up in Dallas, Texas. Kuang is best known for her critically acclaimed fantasy and historical fiction novels. Her debut was the fantasy trilogy, The Poppy Wars, with the first book of the trilogy released in 2018. In 2022, she published Bebel, or the Necessity of Violence. It debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and won the Nebula Award for the best novel. The novel was a British Book of the Year, Blackwell's Book of the Year, a Waterstone's Book of the Year finalist, and the Daily Mail Best Book of 2022. Kuang holds degrees from Georgetown University, Magdalen College, Cambridge, and University College Oxford, and now she is pursuing a PhD in East Asian languages and literatures at Yale University. The full title of the novel that I'm going to focus on today is Bebel, or the Necessity of Violence, an arcane history of the Oxford translators' revolution. It is a speculative historical novel set in an alternate reality in 1830s in Oxford, England. Let me briefly outline the plot first. I apologize for some spoilers that may be on the way, but not too many, I hope. In 1830s in England, translation was not only a scholarly pursuit, but also a source of magical power. Translation magic is harnessed through silver bars that capture the subtle differences between meaning of words in different languages. The more untranslatable the concept is, the more power the silver bar with the words in 2 languages inscribed on it will have. The gap in meaning between these words generates magical energy. In this way, what is lost in translation is used to fuel the British Empire's industrial and colonial dominance. The bars ensure technological and infrastructural enhancement, but also can be used to induce emotional and mental states, such as calming unrest or enforcing obedience, particularly among colonized populations. The story follows Robert Swift, a Chinese orphan who is taken from Canton, China to England by a British professor, Richard Lovell, and as the protagonist and the reader will find out later on in the novel, his father. Robin is raised by Professor Lovell to become a scholar at Bebel. Bebel is the Royal Institute of Translation at Oxford, where translators hold the keys to the British Empire. The chosen group of highly skilled and specially educated translators are responsible for finding and refining match pairs, especially from non-European languages, and engraving the words on the silver bars to produce magical energy. At Bebel, Robin joins a group of students, Remy from India, Victoire from Haiti, and Letty from Britain, who gradually become aware of how their academic work supports imperial exploitation. The young Bebel translators become hopelessly tangled in the dilemma whether to serve the corrupt institute and the British Empire or their own people. The British Empire, endlessly hungry for more silver, becomes a huge drug cartel, growing poppies in India and forcing China to buying opium. At the same time, The young translators are fully aware of the fact that the empire has given them opportunity of intellectual development, success, and in fact, good life. Now to metaphors. As Kuang's novel, as the very title suggests, among other themes, focuses on the power of translation and uses metaphor as the conceptual tool for exploiting the intricate dynamics of the process of translation. The present analysis focuses on certain key translation metaphors in Bebel, and the first one that I would like to have a closer look at is translation is violence. The utterance translation means doing violence is produced by Professor Playfair during a translation theory class for the young translator at Bebel. He concludes the discussion about whether translation can ever be faithful in this way. Of course, the word violence is not meant literally and invites the recipient to infer in what way translation can be viewed as violence. In the process of interpreting what this utterance communicates, in accordance with the relevant theoretic approach, as it is posited, a number of implications become salient to the interpreter. Those that were most salient to me are as follows. Transferring a text from the source culture to the target culture is a kind of imposition. What gets and what does not get translated is an ideological decision. The act of translating can involve taking ownership of a text, often without fully respecting its original context or voice. Translation can be a form of cultural or intellectual colonization. Dominant cultures may translate texts from marginalized cultures in ways that reframe them to fit their own worldview. As becomes quite obvious, the lexical concept of violence, which conveys the sense of physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something, is backgrounded here and gives way to the emerging ad hoc concept, violence asterisk, which has to do with imposition, appropriation, domination, ideological manipulation of meaning. This kind of meaning of the word violence, of the ad hoc concept of violence, emerges in the process of interpretation, as a result of which this new meaning crystallizes. So the interpretation surfaces as a result of the search for implications made easily accessible by the encoded meaning, which help to satisfy the reader's expectations of relevance. We can see here precisely the kind of process of ad hoc concept formation that Wilson discusses with reference to literary text interpretation. I quote, "The ad hoc concept is determined by an automatic process of backward inference. It is simply the concept that warrants these implications." The overall cognitive effect of the metaphor is to prompt readers to reconsider the ethics and politics of translation. In this way, the metaphor portrays translation as an act of imposition, appropriation, possibly resistance, evoking the colonial histories of the past and emphasizing that translation is a socio-political act. Another significant metaphor in the novel advances the idea that translation is an act of betrayal. Professor Playfair finishes his class devoted to faithfulness of translation by saying, "How can we conclude except by acknowledging that an act of translation is then necessarily always an act of betrayal?" A whole range of implications are made salient here, and my interpretation would be that they converge around three core aspects. Translation involves loss. Something essential is always lost in translation: tone, nuance, rhythm, or cultural resonance. So the source text is betrayed in this way. Translation is ethically charged. The act of translation is not neutral. It can misrepresent or reshape the original author's voice, which means being disloyal or betraying the original. Translation is creative. It's not mere copying. It is a recreation of the text by another writer, which inevitably diverges from the original, not being fully faithful to it. These implicatures are weak in relevance theoretic terms. They are recovered by the reader based on context and background knowledge, all these becoming highly salient in his mind in the interpretation process. Again here, in the course of the interpretation, the lexical concept, betrayal meaning the act of exposing or delivering someone to an enemy through treachery or disloyalty, or the act of disappointing a person's trust, hopes, or expectations, or the act of revealing information in violation of confidence, is suppressed. The meaning of the ad hoc concept betrayal, asterisk, emerges from the range of implications that become highly salient to the reader. In effect, the intended meaning backgrounds the senses related to espionage and treason, foregrounding the meanings related to the ethical and moral dilemmas faced by translators who must navigate the tension between fidelity to the original text and the need to adapt to a new audience. By highlighting the betrayal inherent in translation, Kuang encourages the reader to question the loyalty and integrity of the translation process. And now here's another short passage from the book, which I would like to analyze in terms of implicit import that the metaphoric layer here communicates. This is another quote from translation theory class in the novel. Here is what Professor Playfair says. Translation involves the spatial dimension, a literal transportation of text across conquered territory, words delivered like spices from an alien land. I would like to look at this this passage through the lens of extended metaphor. The encoded meanings make a number of implications easily accessible, giving rise to a loose interpretation, which profiles translation as involving cultural transfer, ideological relocation, recontextualization, with the target culture being colonized by exotic content imported by the imported exotic content, leading to confronting otherness. In metaphors of this kind, in extended metaphors, in other words, lingering literal senses in Carsten's approach, or lingering linguistic forms, as Wilson views the interpretation process, contribute to the overall interpretation. This overall interpretation, in my analysis, has to do with generating the implicit import along three dimensions. Translation transfer text across space and time. It involves moving ideas, emotions, and intentions across linguistic and cultural boundaries. The second one has to do with translation being about conquest. It can be an act of cultural imperialism and appropriation or ideological subjugation. And finally, translation is exotization. Translated texts are foreign, exotic, imported commodities to be consumed by the target culture. There is yet another metaphor that is important as far as Kuang's portrayal of translation is concerned. Translation is power. Kuang also explores this metaphor, and translation in the novel is simply depicted as a means of controlling and exploiting other cultures. The novel illustrates this through the use of silver bars inscribed with translated words, which can magically increase fishing yields, perform upkeep on bridges, and even kill others. The bars turn linguistic knowledge into a tool of imperial control, reinforcing the idea that translation is power. In fact, the power of translation is epitomized in the way the word translation, as if inscribed on the silver bars, on the silver rods, should work. In fact, the teacher in translation warns the students never to inscribe the word translation in different languages on the bars, because its destructive power will destroy everything. It will destroy also the silver, not allowing it to be reused ever again. I'm afraid I will not have enough time to read through this passage in which Professor Playfair actually issues the warning, but it's very powerful. And in effect, what happens when he demonstrates how silver behaves when different words that depict translation are engraved on the bar has to do with strange physical destruction that actually occurs. So as Professor Playfair says, the manifestation has nowhere to go except the bar itself. So it increases the ongoing cycle until at last the bar breaks down, and this happens. The bar leapt high into the air and shattered into the hundreds of tiny pieces that scattered across the tables, the chairs, the floor. Robin's cohort backed away, flinching. Professor Playfair did not bat an eye. Do not try it, not even out of curiosity. This silver, he kicked at one of the fallen shards, cannot be reused. Even if it's melted down and reforged, any bars made with it, with even an ounce of it, will be impotent. Even worse, the effect is contagious. You activate the bar when it's on a pile of silver, and it spreads to everything in its contact. In fact, this powerful tool is actually used in the novel, but not to issue the major spoiler, I will not talk about it. So let me conclude. Kuang's novel intricately explores the power dynamics and complexities of translation through metaphors. The present analysis aimed at demonstrating how the relevant theoretic approach elucidates the way Kuang's metaphors guide the reader towards specific interpretations by foregrounding and backgrounding certain meanings. The analysis shows that the metaphors as used by the novelist, who is in fact the translator herself, not only depict translation as a cognitive and linguistic process, but also explore its ideological and ethical dimensions. It reveals that the author uses metaphors not only to describe translation, but also to shape the reader's deeper understanding of its nature and engaging him or her with the implications of these metaphors. The relevant theoretic analysis in each of the cases that we have looked at shows how what drives the interpretation process is the search for implications made easily accessible by the encoded meaning, which helps to satisfy the addressee's expectations of relevance. The ad hoc concept is in each case determined by an automatic process of backward inference. It is simply the concept that warrants these implicatures. As one of the critics puts it, Kuang blends dark academia, anti-colonial critique, and fantasy to challenge the romanticization of elite institutions and to highlight the violence embedded in systems of knowledge and empire. This indeed is the picture that emerges from the relevant theoretic analysis of translation metaphors in the novel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the nice talk. We now have about 8 minutes for questions, if anyone wants to raise their hand. Yes, Daniel Sachs, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I couldn't raise my hand for a moment there. Thank you, Maria. That was actually really interesting, and I think that was that's the most convincing book blurb advertisement that I've heard in a while. So I want to go order that almost immediately. My question, the first, I think, question that comes to mind is whether you think this novel is useful as a pedagogical tool for translator training? Is this something that you would like to get your students interested in? Is it a good way to talk about the metaphors of translation, or is it more for translation geeks, let's say?
Thank you very much for this question, Daniel. Well, I think it's a very interesting book, intriguing, and it also makes you realize certain things that you may not necessarily think about in terms of what translation does and how powerful actually translation can be. So I think it, for educational reasons, it may actually prove very useful. I think that students can actually learn a lot from it, and it can sparkle a discussion or to what extent Kuang actually exaggerates a little bit, or maybe she doesn't. We may not fully realize how translated text actually change certain realities in which we function. What sort of ideology, in fact, sometimes may impregnate or be brought into the target culture, how the decisions that translators actually make in an important way may affect what the readers get and how the readers, in fact, are affected, not only intellectually, but also probably in how they feel about certain things, what they understand and what they learn about certain ideas or certain important phenomena in the world. So I think it's a very stimulating kind of didactic material, interesting to read, but also something that makes you think. And of course, each of those metaphors that I have presented today may sparkle off interpretations that go far beyond what I have focused on today. Obviously, since metaphors, by definition, the way they are approached in relevance theory, create poetic effects, and there is this element of indeterminacy there, there is room for individual interpretation, there is room for reflection, and I think this is precisely what we need in translation classes. The more so that nowadays manual sort of mechanical translation can be done by machines for us, but that does not mean that we can leave translation just to machines, because there are these ethical, moral, and also intellectual considerations to think about, and Kuang makes us aware of all these. What do you think? Would that be okay to use it as a didactic material in a translation class?
Sure, it seems like that to me, based on your presentation. Of course, I was immediately distracted by the translation studies aspect, but to get back to your RT-informed analysis of the metaphors, it seems like she's done a really great job of weaving a very interesting web of conceptual ideas that the kind of thing that we analyze in translation studies a lot, but then she's managed to convey them in a very poetic way, like you're saying, in a powerful way, for an audience that's not necessarily so well versed in those ideas. So I really like your analysis of the RT-informed analysis of the way those metaphors work, Kim.
Thank you. There is one more important aspect to be brought in connection with possibly exploiting this novel as a didactic material in translation class. There are a lot, well, she has done a lot of research, as she herself admits, on the history of translation. So there is a reference also to classical works on translation. And in the whole novel, there are lots of footnotes, as in an academic text. So this novel, to some extent, is supposed to imitate an academic text. So in the footnotes, you also get a lot of interesting facts about translation history and things like that. So that's another reason. The more so that apart from translation metaphors, there are some very interesting language metaphors that she also refers to. Because of course, translation is powerful only through the fact that it is language that actually is the major tool of power.
Yes, Agnieszka Piaskarska.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria, for this hugely inspiring presentation. I just wanted to share a thought that, you know, this very often manifests itself in very obviously in political discourse, right? In translating some ideologically charged messages like political speeches. So yeah, I find these metaphors, as you said, maybe slightly exaggerated, but also true. And for instance, you know, when translating a political speech, in some for some newspapers, for instance, right, or for some media. So when the newspaper aligns with the political view of the speaker, they might say that he implicated something, or that he implied or simply said something. Whereas if they don't agree, they might use just a different verb, like, you know, he insinuated or he accused somebody. So this is actually very frequent. So I just wanted to say that you know, it definitely resonates with my experience with translation, what the book says and what you so nicely conveyed to us through the lens of relevance theory.
Thank you very much. Of course, I couldn't agree more. Just to finish on a slightly more optimistic note, there is one metaphor that I have not presented today. And this metaphor is that translators are peacemakers. So there is also the other side of the coin, and another interesting image, another interesting dimension of translation to explore. Thank you.